I want to do an oral recording, a read aloud of this excerpt from the book The Fight in the Fields. This particular excerpt deals with the grape boycott that occurred during the late 1960s that was led by Cesar Chavez and his labor union, the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee. Now, the reason why I want to do this read aloud is to help students with it, of course, because the reading can be difficult at times, but also it gives me an opportunity to explain things to students. So I'll be pausing at times to explain what's going on in this reading and to explain some of the content with it in the hopes that that'll help students understand what's going on here better. Also, you should be reading Digital Text Module 15.4 and filling out that graphic organizer, which will help you understand this as well. And I did mention it in my lecture on the counterculture. Okay, so I'll be reading and then pausing at times to explain things, whether it be a key term or a key piece of content. Okay, so once again, this excerpt concerns the grape boycott that occurred, the national grape boycott that occurred in the late 1960s. Now remember, a boycott is when a group of people, and you need a large group of people for it to be successful, but it's when a group of people chooses not to give to a business, quite frankly, or to not purchase a product that a business sells because they're trying to correct what they believe is an injustice that business is carrying out. There's something that business is doing wrong. There's something that business is doing that is hurting people, and the group that is boycotting that business is hoping to take away some of the profits of that business in the hopes that they will correct this injustice. They will correct what they are doing wrong. Okay? You may remember the Montgomery bus boycott was very successful during the civil rights movement of the 1950s. This is similar to that, but this will be nationwide. Okay? So let me begin the reading now, please. Okay, so to make the ambitious boycott work, the union, now a union is when a group of laborers organize to try and improve their working conditions, and they can do that through several different ways. One way is to simply protest. Another is to go on strike, and when you go on strike, it's when you refuse to work at a business, and that hurts the productivity of the business and can lead to negotiations and changes in labor conditions. So the union needed more volunteers. So staffing was cut back at some of the service centers that had sprung up around the state. Now they're referring to California here. California is the state they're referring to. Picket captains were pulled back from strike lines and field organizers redirected to the urban campaign. So this boycott is going to take place in several cities across the United States and up into Canada. Remember, urban means city, for which the Union had targeted 40 strategic cities across the United States and Canada. With his work on the Kennedy campaign halted by tragedy, so we're talking about 1968 here. Remember, in 1968, Bobby Kennedy was killed in California while he was running for president. And it's particularly tragic for the Kennedy family because remember, John F. Kennedy had been killed in 1963 when he was president of the United States. So Bobby Kennedy is killed in 1968, a very tumultuous year in United States history. This man, Al Rojas, had been working on his campaign to help him get elected. That campaign was halted by tragedy. Al Rojas bundled his wife, Elena, and their 3 children into a Union car and left the 40 acres, the city they were in California, the town, for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in July. Neither he nor Elena had ever been out of California. He was born in a labor camp with a peach box as his cradle, poor conditions, and he had no idea what it would be like on the East Coast. They were stuffing their clothes in their grocery bags when Chavez came by to say goodbye. Take care. There are unfortunately a few typos in this reading. That should be take care. Take care. Goodbye. Make sure you have all your contacts, Rojas remembers Chavez saying. I stepped back and I said, this is my chance to ask him the real big question. Cesar, I said, how do you do a boycott? Chavez was speechless at first. After an uncomfortable pause, he told Rojas the boycott would be on-the-job training. To be truthful, Cesar said, what you and your family are going to do has never been done before. I don't know how you do a boycott. You just go out there and tell those people to stop eating grapes. Get them to stop eating grapes. Now, one of the questions you're going to have at the end of this reading deals with this dialogue, and it asks, what type of leadership is Chavez demonstrating here, or what type of leader do you think he is? So Chavez isn't giving them a lot of instructions here, but he's obviously firmly trusting them to get the job done. So there's a lot of ways you can answer that question. You know, what type of leader is not giving these people a lot of instructions, but firmly believes they can carry it out? What type of leadership might this be? There's a lot of ways you can answer that question. Try to think about what type of leadership is it when you firmly trust people to carry out a job, but maybe don't give them a lot of instructions as to how to do so. Okay, a lot of different ways you can answer it. This dialogue here will be key to that question. Okay, on the way to Pittsburgh, Anglo sympathizers. Now, Anglo was a term referring to European Americans or white Americans in this time period. Okay, so that's what they mean by Anglo here. Contacted at random from El Macriado's subscription list. Now, El Macriado is an Hispanic newspaper that existed at the time. I don't believe it exists anymore. I think it stopped being publicized in about the mid-1970s. But it was a Hispanic newspaper that existed at the time and covered issues like the Grape Boycott, issues that Hispanic people were dealing with. Okay? As you read this, also note who they get help from. Okay? Because that's going to be one of your questions too. The Rojases are going to get a lot of help from people. Notice they have Anglo sympathizers or white people, in this particular case, white Americans helping them out in Pittsburgh here. Okay? Fed the family, offered them money for gas, and helped them on their way. The Rojases were taken aback, however, when they drove through a tunnel into downtown Pittsburgh and found a metropolis, a large city, of high rises and bridges. Cesar had told them Pittsburgh was a small mining town. It's not, it's a pretty big city. They were put at ease, though, after an Irish Catholic priest, another helper, welcomed them enthusiastically. And the Steelworkers Union, some more help, put them up for a few nights in a luxury hotel. For more than 2 years, the Rojases worked with all sides of Pittsburgh, from unions and churches and synagogues, which are Jewish churches, to the Black Power and anti-war movements. Notice once again all the help they are getting. From the beginning, there was much to learn. A friendly steelworker took Rojas aside and advised him to get rid of his Volkswagen plastered with boycott stickers. A Volkswagen, as you may very well know, kids, is a German car. It's a foreign car. So if you want the support of American labor unions in the United States, particularly auto workers, you may want to get yourself an American-made car. That's what he's being advised to do here. He says, Rojas, goddamn it, sorry for the swear word, kids, direct quote, in this town, you don't drive around pushing the union scene in a non-union car. I corrected that right away, and we got a Plymouth, an American-made car. Rojas found that Jewish groups were among some of the cause's strongest supporters in Pittsburgh. Notice the Rojases are getting a lot of help from groups who've experienced discrimination or inequality or exploitation, poor working conditions in their past history. So notice these groups are helping each other. He also learned, after a gentle admonishment, to be negatively reinforced, to stop referring to them as Anglos. So stop using that term. In 1969, Al and Elena would name their fourth child a boycott baby, born in Pittsburgh, Shalom, Hebrew for peace. So the Rojases have been so impacted by help from the Jewish people of Pittsburgh that they named their fourth baby Shalom, which is Hebrew for peace. The black community also backed the boycott, Rojas recalls. But his first meeting with activists was a near disaster. Young men in dashikis, I don't know if you know what dashikis are, but they're kind of a big, it's kind of like a big baggy shirt, and it's very colorful. It's African in fashion style. So a lot of black civil rights groups, black nationalist groups were wearing these to demonstrate pride in their culture. So young men in dashikis mourning Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination told Rojas they would be happy to get rid of the grapes by any means necessary. Now that's a phrase that should be familiar to you, a phrase quoted by Malcolm X, right? With Al trailing behind them, they marched into a store and ordered the manager to remove all California grapes immediately. When he hesitated, the militants carried all the boxes of grapes stored outside, poured gasoline on them, and set them on fire. So, any means necessary, right? A little bit more militant than just nonviolent protest. By November 1968, the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, was keeping a close watch over Rojas and the boycott, with spies reporting on events as innocuous means thin or weak, as a screening of an Andy Warhol movie. Andy Warhol is a famous artist of the time. Andy Warhol movie at Carnegie Mellon University, prominent university in Pittsburgh, where a student urged their group to attend a march in support of the boycott. What we see here, kids, remember this time period, the FBI was really not protecting or helping civil rights groups. As a matter of fact, they typically were doing the opposite. They were trying to hurt their efforts, infiltrate their efforts, and arrest people for very thin reasons, or harass people for very thin reasons. They typically were not helping civil rights groups. They were typically doing the opposite. When the march took place, an FBI source was there as well. As recorded in Bureau Files, FBI, Rojas distributed to each participant one grape, a plain envelope, and the address of President-elect Richard M. Nixon. Now this tells us that at this point, Richard Nixon had won the election in 1968. So he is the president-elect. Each person receiving the above was instructed to mask the grape, place it in an envelope, and mail it to Nixon at the New York address. In the spring of 1969, the Union declared a boycott on the West's largest grocery chain, Safeway, where Gihumara, I believe is how you pronounce that, sold 20% of its grapes. Safeway's directors, some of whom were also involved in agribusiness. Okay, so agribusiness is large corporate farm businesses. They're not talking about small farmers here. They're talking about large corporate farm businesses who own a lot of farms and produce a lot of products. Okay, so agribusiness is large corporate farms. Gihumara was one of those. Okay. So Safeway's directors, some of whom were also involved in agribusiness, fought back. They refused to take grapes off their shelves, and freedom to work committees shadowed boycotters to argue against union contracts. Now, I don't know if you've heard of that phrase, freedom to work, before. It's a phrase that has made a comeback recently, but it's a tactic that is often used to reduce union power, the power of labor unions. What happens is a lot of companies or businesses or corporations form agreements with unions where when they hire people, the people are, a condition of the people being hired is they are expected to be members of a labor union and they're expected to pay dues to the labor union. That's part of the condition of the employment. And these are agreements that unions form with management. The reason for this, of course, is to continue to make labor unions be strong and to have success in negotiating for better working conditions. Freedom to work is a phrase that was developed by conservatives in this time period or people who are against unions to limit the power of unions, and basically stated that unions cannot make these agreements. They cannot make agreements where in to be employed you have to be in a labor union. That has to be the right of the individual to choose it. Really, it's a way or it's a tactic to reduce the power of labor unions, because what we see is labor unions typically make conditions much better for laborers, including better pay and benefits. And when you have freedom to work companies, we see that power reduced. Growers hired the Whitaker and Baxter public relations firm to launch a $2 million campaign to churn out op-ed pieces, ads, and bumper stickers urging the public to protect consumer rights and to eat California grapes, the forbidden fruit. Kind of an advertising ploy here, right? Boycotting it, forbidden fruit, you get it? Meanwhile, the Rojas family branched out to New York, West Virginia, and Ohio, organizing parades and marches against the Kroger chain. Now, that's a grocery store you've probably heard of, where the couple was once arrested for using a loudspeaker. After months of work, Rojas finally had his big victory. The Pittsburgh boycott yielded an agreement that removed all California grapes from all inner city grocery stores and supermarkets. This is a great victory for the boycott. Okay. The disappearance of grapes from the shelves was not all due to the boycott. In January 1969, the Union had started hearing rumors that the Defense Department was gobbling up reduced price California grapes and sending them to troops in Vietnam. Rojas's brother, who was a Navy cook on a destroyer off Vietnam, wrote to him that he and some shipmates threw dozens of boxes of grapes off, another typo here, that should be off the side of the ship. There's no way we're going to eat them, Rojas's brother said. I told the guys here those are being boycotted. So here's what we see. What we see, and this is another question you're going to have to deal with, what we see is the government, the federal government, really not helping these boycotters at all. As a matter of fact, they're taking efforts to hurt the boycott. One of the ways in which they did this was FBI infiltrating and arresting people for flimsy reasons, like encouraging people to join a boycott at an art show. And we also see the Defense Department buying up grapes from agribusinesses like Jihumara, okay, and so that they could still profit off the sale of grapes, and this would hurt the effectiveness of the boycott. But here we see members of the Navy, right, troops in the Navy, midshipmen saying, we're not going to participate anyway, and they're throwing the grapes off the side of the ship. By the middle of 1969, the Defense Department was buying 11 million pounds of grapes for each serviceman. So trying to give business to agribusiness, hurting the boycott. The Union reacted by picketing military installations from California to Washington, D.C. But the farm workers' campaign had touched a nerve in America and abroad. It was no longer just college students and trade unionists boycotting grapes. They are getting support from the American people, kids, consumers, people who buy stuff all over the country were avoiding the fruit, something that struck fear into the hearts of agribusiness, and people were thinking about farm workers in a new way. One of the most effective young boycotters sent out to appeal to consumers was Jessica Govea, a bright 21-year-old from the racially polarized town of Bakersfield, California, who starting at age 4 had picked everything from grapes to cotton. Govea volunteered to go to Toronto on the boycott, not realizing it was 3,000 miles away. In July of 1968, she left with Marshall Gans, her boyfriend at the time, and a Catholic priest, more help, right, Mark Day, to set up a boycott office on a very important front. Toronto was the third largest export market for California table and wine grapes. Canada as a whole purchased about 20% of the state's crop. On the one hand, it was tough. On the other, it was a liberating and wonderful experience, Govea remembers. My strongest memory of going out on an information picket line in Toronto was when I saw these 2 white men walking toward me who reminded me of young white men in Bakersfield, Govea recalls. I made myself strong and went up to them and said, "Excuse me, could I ask you to help farm workers by not buying grapes?" As if on cue, they both turned around and showed me their jackets, which had giant United Auto Workers emblems on them. And they turned around and said, "We're all for you." We're all for you. Once again, more help and support. It turned out the world wasn't like Bakersfield, concluded Govea, who now teaches organizing at Rutgers University in New Jersey. It turned out the world was much, much bigger and much kinder than Bakersfield. Okay, I think that is a pretty neat excerpt from the book, The Fight in the Fields. Hopefully my explanation will help you understand what's going on here. Be sure to read Digital Text Module 15.4 and fill out that graphic organizer. That'll help you understand things too. You've got some questions to answer now at the end of this reading. And the second page, there's the handout with this. There's 2 pages to it. The second page is questions concerning you forming your own boycott. Now that's not as difficult as it sounds. Just try to think of some things or a business that does some things that maybe isn't good. And you can actually research that. There's plenty of things to find. Maybe something you'd like to see changed. And then just follow the questions, just answer the questions, and thinking about how you might go about doing it. And if you want, you can work with another student or two. Groups of 2 to 3 can work on this, or just work on it by yourself. That's fine too. Can work on this to help each other. If you do work with other students, make sure all of you still fill out the form and let me know who you worked with. So I need each of you to turn in a form and let me know who you worked with if you do work with anybody. Now, of course, if you do work with someone, we are social distancing right now. So you still got to stay away from each other right now. Just call each other, email, Zoom, whatever you want to do to try to talk to each other. Snapchat, I don't care what you do. But if you want to share ideas with each other and answer some of those questions on the second page, you sure can do that. And as always, please contact me if you have any questions or concerns, and I will try to schedule a Zoom session to talk about this assignment and any others you may have questions about. Okay, kids, stay well.